Hello friends, I've got a quick video for you today. This is the Gamesir G7 HE. It's a wired controller, so keep that in mind whilst we get through this video because we're going to find out why someone might choose a wired controller over a wireless one in the year of our Lord 2024. Gamesir sent this over to me for the purpose of making this video. They haven't given me any instructions, so all experiences and opinions are my own. It's compatible with the series consoles, Xbox One, PC, and you can find the relevant links below after we're done here. I've been using this controller for about a week now and I've got a decent grasp on what this controller is about and how it compares to the official Series X controller bundled in with the console. So let's start with that first. Why would someone choose the G7 HE over the official Xbox controller, which costs roughly the same? Well, the G7 HE is actually a middle ground between a standard controller and a Pro controller. It has paddle buttons around the back, which is very common for Pro controllers. You can bind these to mirror anything else on the pad. The easiest example of using these is in first-person shooting games where run and jump can be bound to these, so jumping and free aiming can be performed at the same time, or possibly in a racing game where it can be used for gear up and gear down. It has hair trigger settings, which is a functional feature only here, not a physical feature. And by that I mean, with the more expensive controllers, you can set the trigger to physically stop at a certain point. The hair trigger feature here will activate instantly, but it doesn't stop you from fully squeezing the button down. It has a much higher polling rate than the official controller. A polling rate determines how often a controller sends information to the console, which in theory helps to reduce input lag. For reference, the polling rate on the official controller is set to 125 Hz, whilst on the G7 HE, the minimum setting is 250 Hz. It can go to 500 and even 1000, but the last setting is experimental and will disable the headphone jack. The Gamesir Nexus app is required for some customizations. Unfortunately, it's only available on PC, not Mac, not Android or iPhone, only on PC. If you are on a Mac, you'll need to find a way of running Windows like using a virtual machine. So those are the pro features of the controller, but it also has everyday features that can benefit the everyday gamer. The G7 HE uses Hall effect sticks, which is highly sought after by some gamers. They use sensors and magnets to determine the position of the sticks, and I can't comment on whether or not these are better than standard potentiometer sticks because this is down to preference. But I can say, to my thumbs, they feel slightly lighter than the official Xbox ones. In theory, they are supposed to be resistant to wear and tear and stick drift. But even if you do have issues down the line, there is a recalibration tool in the controller and on the app that can recenter them if it happens. In the month that I've used this, it hasn't required a recalibration. The anti-friction rings installed on the rims of the sticks keep the motions super smooth and non-scratchy. They are really quite comfortable to use and they're replaceable with different color options if you are a fan of modding. The D-pad is nice and clicky, which is great for menus and general selecting of stuff. But the official one has it beat here because the floating disc style can cover fighting games too. If you look closer, you see some symbols on the D-pad. That's because when used along with the mode button, it controls volume and sound balance between game and party chat when you have a headset plugged in. Another thing that's clicky and very satisfying to use are the buttons. Every button sounds and feels much better than what we get on the official controller, and you'll be surprised how much difference that can make during a game session. Even though the buttons are clicky, they sound quieter than the hollow, plasticky sound we get from the Microsoft model. You can hear both of these controllers during my sound test later on. Let's take a look at the details. The function cluster is spread out around the home button instead of grouped like the official one. The home button doesn't light up, but there is a small LED just above it that serves the same purpose. The thumbsticks feel high quality with convex pads, so it feels like a gentle bulge instead of a crevice like the ones on the official pad. The mode button here is used in combination with other buttons to change various settings. As I mentioned before, it's best to download the Gamesir Nexus app, but if you absolutely can't, use this button to map the back pedals, toggle the hair triggers and change profiles. For the 3 different profiles, you can set various options for the button mappings, stick range, triggers, vibration settings, and then use this button to change the profile number on the fly. I'll go through those options later in the video. Moving down the controller, there's a very tasteful bit of branding here. This is branding done right because it's not interfering with the overall look of the controller and adds the occasional visual flair. Very nice. There isn't an extension port on the bottom like the official controller, but we do have an audio jack with a mute button. Around the back, there are some rubber grips that do feel really nice, but my fear with rubber grips is that they will eventually fray and come loose like the ones I've seen with the Xbox Elite controller. I prefer the etched texture on the official controller in this regard. But like I said, it is a nice rubber grip, so if this is your preference, you can see it's very well integrated into the controller. Another cool detail is the recessed USB-C port. It goes quite deep, so there's not as much risk of damaging the port if you accidentally knock it at an angle. The cable sits in tight, and it's actually a really nice one that's super long, has a high quality weave, and even has its own cable management strap. It looks like a 3-meter cable to me just from eyeballing it. If you want to use your own cable, you might have some issues since the head will have to be a similar size to the stock one. Finally, the faceplate is magnetized and easily removable. This is so we can replace the anti-friction rings or swap it out with a different faceplate. Some of the faceplates I've seen look good, and Gamesir told me that the SE plates are compatible with this HE controller. You can find a link to these accessories below. In general, the controller looks really good. It's got some cool, aesthetically pleasing angles, and the curves play with the light to create a floating effect, highlighting the clean, monotone colorway. I really like the way it looks, almost like a black and white page from a comic book. I can highly recommend this white colorway. So now I want to show you the Nexus app. I'm not going to spend too much time on each feature because I don't really understand all of them, to be honest, but I want to show you what's available. On this first page, we already have the polling rate setting at the bottom. It seems like it's out here because it's a universal setting, so no matter which profile you're in, the polling rate will be set to whatever has been chosen here. As I mentioned earlier, the official controller is set to 125Hz. The minimum setting on the G7 HE is 250Hz. It can go to 500 and 1000, where a warning will pop up to say that in the 1000Hz mode, the headphone jack will be deactivated. And then we have the 4 different profiles to choose from. There's the default and 3 separate ones that you can add a name to and go in to configure. Let's choose profile 1. Mapping is quite self-explanatory. We can choose any button except the share button and select the function. This is where you can set the paddles if you want to use them. In the sticks tab, we can set the left and right stick range. So the further up we set this toggle, the more dead zone we get in the middle. So we have to push the stick further for it to start activating. Setting it to raw disables the outer radio dead zone for higher precision and speed in some games according to the tooltip. That doesn't really mean anything to me, but I've seen people discuss the feature on Reddit, so check that out if you want to find out more. Finally, we can swap the left stick and the D-pad, and there's a D-pad diagonal lock which shuts off the diagonal inputs on the D-pad. In the trigger tab, this toggle here creates a dead zone on the trigger, so it has to be pulled further for it to activate. And of course, this is the hair trigger toggle that removes the analog input, so it's instantly on or off. The tooltip also mentions here that you can toggle this on the fly by holding the mode button and the trigger button. And last we have the vibration tab. This is where we can set the vibration level for the triggers and the grip. The 2 options down here are quite interesting. It's possible to have the triggers increase in strength the deeper you press it. And the option below will make the trigger and grip vibrate at the same time. And after setting up all of the options, we have a testing section for a wrap up. After using the G7 HE for a few weeks, I found that I really enjoyed the anti-friction rings, the satisfying clicky buttons, and the well-calibrated rumble. The Xbox controllers, especially the 360 one, is up there with my favourite controllers of all time. But the drop in quality and hollowness of the official controller that came with my Series X is a massive letdown. The rumble on it feels too strong and rattly, and the clacks and bumps of the controls are uncomfortably piercing on my eardrums. I would have been very happy if it was built like the G7 HE. If the G7 HE had a wireless mode, there would be no reason I would pick up the official pad over this, because it does pretty much everything right. But as we discovered in this video, the G7 HE is kind of a semi-pro controller. And some of the features, like the high polling rate options, probably only work over a wired connection. You don't even have to be a pro player to find some of these features useful though. If you're at least somewhat competitive and aiming for a good KD ratio on Call of Duty for example, the back paddles and hair triggers are great advantages, especially if you consider the price. The G7 HE isn't that much more expensive than the official pad, and it's pretty much on par if you find it on discount. So to have such a well-made, high-functioning, feature-packed controller with Hall effect components at this price is excellent. Now I know I've been glazing this controller hard, but I do have a few issues that I must mention. Yes, the quality is generally good, but the back panel here on my one clicks when I push it in. It feels like there's not enough support behind this panel, so it moves just enough to make a clicking sound. Obviously your fingers shouldn't be in the spot anyway, most of the time they will be on the shoulder buttons, and it doesn't really feel like it's going to break or snap. It's just a small nitpick I noticed in an otherwise solidly built controller. For my personal taste, I hope that Gamesir can one day release a feature-packed controller with wireless connectivity. A 250Hz polling rate similar to the DualSense on PS5 is enough for most casual hardcore players like myself, and that should be achievable with Bluetooth and probably 2.4 GHz wireless. It's obvious that a lot of thought went into the design and construction of the G7 HE. For a relatively new company, Gamesir seemed to be doing things the right way. Just like I said in my review for the G8 Plus, what you get for the price is very reasonable, and I wouldn't be surprised if Gamesir one day reaches popularity levels similar to Razer and 8-bit do. I hope you found today's video helpful. You can find all the relevant shopping links below. Let me know what you think about the G7 HE if you have one or you're planning to get one, and if you want to see my review for the G8 Plus, which makes handheld gaming an absolute joy, click on this video.